Welcome back, friends and fellow philosophers, to this Wild Isle author interview. I am honored to have with me T. Alex Ratcliffe. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. How about you?
Pretty well. The first question of the day, we're going to come right out of the gate. Uh, I don't know unless you told me before, in which case I'll be very embarrassed, but I don't know what the T in your first name stands for. I don't know if you're ever going to reveal that. If not, should I call you Alex throughout the interview, or what do you
Yes,
like to go by?
the I go by Alex. The T is for my first name. Actually, you can find out what that is in Hapless Homesteader because my formatter accidentally put the wrong name at the beginning, so it has my first name and my middle initial, I think, rather than my first initial and my middle name.
Oh, well,
But
that must be frustrating.
everyone in my family has the same first name, or every male in my family has it, so
All right.
that's
Well,
why I go by my middle name.
yeah. So you viewers, go out and get your copy of Hapless Homesteader so you too can find out the mysterious first name of T. Alex Ratcliffe. I know I'll be doing the same, except I don't have to go out and buy one because I have one right up on my shelf. So, uh, yeah, today we're going to be talking about Alex and his writing inspirations process, what he has coming up, all of that. But for those of you who, or for those who don't know who you are, Alex, and what you write and what you do, could you give us a small introduction to yourself?
Sure. So I'm T. Alex Ratcliffe. I just pretty much write whatever story comes into my head. So my first stories were about a professional sports team that was done in a sci-fi setting with weapons that were designed to stun and not kill. This is coming from somebody who doesn't actually watch or really care much about professional sports until I started writing about them. My second series is about post apocalyptic homesteading. I write more about stories that I find interesting and would like to read rather than what's conventional and typically tries to sell. Because I think life deserves to be a little bit weird and every horror deserves to be a little bit funny. I also run a YouTube channel where I review other people's books, talk about stories, and I'm currently running a D&D campaign.
Yeah, that's something I want to catch up on. So what's the title of the campaign?
So it's called The Contracts of the Blue Dandelion. It's about the absolute worst mercenary guild you will ever come across. They are so bad they literally pay their people in silver rather than gold coins, even if the amount would be in gold coins because they aren't trusted with gold. They're also one of the oldest ones. We currently have four players, which would be Amaya Tenchi, the author of Dracula. I think it's Dracula's Guest. We have Molly, the another vampire author. We have Ninja Togepi, who is an artist on Twitter, and we have Matt Waterhouse, who is an author of the Eye of the Universe. And they all get to play various mercenaries in this company in a world that's run by a church and has a direct hatred of warlocks, which one of our characters is a warlock.
That sounds like a ton of fun, man. What's really amazing to me and that I love to hear is that you've gathered all of these, fellow authors and artists together for a game to have that real rich sense of community. For those of you listening, I think we all, with the exception of Ninja Togepi, who I know of, I've just never had direct conversation with, uh, we're all, I guess you could say, fellow travelers, happy acquaintances out on the great. I was going to say out in the Great Plains, but that's not exactly the imagery I want to go for. Traversing the deep desert that is the Indie Sphere, I guess we could call it that. Indie Valley. Yeah, I like that. The Indie Valley of Darkness. Um, so yes. So
As
what I
somebody who
would
lives in a valley, I have to say, I like living in a valley. It's very nice. But I'm in an Appalachian valley, so there's lots of trees and animals.
I'm also in an Appalachian Valley. I'm in the Ohio Valley. Which valley do you reside in?
The West Virginia, Virginia area.
Okay, so we want
So
to
I'm
be
in the old, yeah.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that'd be further out east, wouldn't it? Towards the Eastern Panhandle.
Hmm.
I'm way up north in the dingy, decrepit city. I'm going to call it a city for it's city for West Virginia standards of Wheeling, which I'm writing about. But this isn't about me. This is about you. So, the first question I've been asking everyone that I've been doing these author interviews with is really about your beginnings. And by beginnings, I don't mean like the first story that you wrote. I mean, what do you think was the event or series of events or influences that put you on the road to becoming an author? Because it's a very daunting thing to decide to write, particularly if you're going to show someone what you've written, particularly if you're going to publish and sell it. So, what put you on this, you know, dark and arduous journey through the indie valley of darkness?
So that would probably be the trip I took in the summer before my senior year of high school. We'd had an exchange student come stay with us, I believe, 2 years before, and that was during the whole 9/11 thing, and things got arranged so that I got to go stay with her family over that summer. Now, my French has always been dubious at best, and it wasn't very good back then either. So I'm in a country where I barely speak the language, with a bunch of people that I'm only partially familiar with. And so they introduced me to a lot of books. So I started reading during this trip. And that's when I started being unlocked the secrets of storytelling. And I had brought some books with me because my mom was always a big reader. So during this trip, though I had never I think I'd finished one book before this in my entire life. Uh, I actually read about 4 books on this month-long trip where I was in Europe, and that got me to thinking that these are good, but I think I can do better. And so I started writing my own stories, and my first stories were the basic things you get from a teenager who was influenced by anime and all this other stuff. Uh, I called them. I had these series of stories which is never going to see the light of day. I called the Noname Chronicles, which was just a perversion of No Name. Um, and the first story I think I wrote was about a town guard who was noticing some weird goings on in the city he lived in that was all grown from the same tree. And the end of the story turned out that the tree was forming a kind of parasitic relationship with some of the members of the town, and it was getting ready to take over the whole town. And it would like burrow into their skin and their brains, and he was the only one that wasn't affected by it. And the end of the story was he stabbed some kind of toxin into the tree that drove it insane and all the people, which created a giant forest of attacking blades, basically marring the landscape. It was kind of a juvenile story, but I had a few more that were attached to it.
No, that sounds awesome, man. I want to see that. Every single time I've asked anyone about the early fiction, and they'll say the same thing that I say. So I'm a huge hypocrite on this. But it's like, no, first stuff was terrible. I'm never showing it to anyone. But that sounds something right out of the golden, let's say the golden crust of pulp, right? Because obviously, if you dig into pulp, there's a lot of bad stuff, but then there's the greatest stuff. That's what that sounds like to me. When you said Noname, I just kept thinking like Noname Chronicle the whole time for the anime inspiration. Uh, but no, there's no
I
shame in
know
that
the
because look,
name. That
good.
name came from a friend of mine because we wanted to work on a series of video games together, and I was the one writing the stories for them. And that's where we couldn't think of a name, so we just worked with no name for a while. And then one of the teachers told us to pervert it with the weird pronunciation, so I just threw an A at the end and made it one word. So it was just called the No Name Chronicles.
That works, man. Sometimes it's
But
as simple as that. So.
that's one thing I've learned throughout writing is that the best thing you can do is try to keep things simple and easy. Like if you can keep things pronounceable and approachable, you're probably going to be doing more good than to make it big and flashy.
Yeah, I think that's where we differ. The reason why I think that is, or the reason why that's at the top of my mind is, you're the first indie author I've interviewed who didn't have this background where, uh, you know, parents reading to you all the time, were reading from a very, very young age, was writing from a very, very young age. So far, it's always been that kind of influence. Whereas for me, I didn't really start until high school, and then even then, I put it down until college. I picked it back up again. Also had the same influences, lots of games, lots of anime. Uh, and you said you started this out by being the story writer for a a game that you were working on with a friend. Was that right?
Yes, we worked on a few video games, and I usually tried to get the story going. Um, I was also a big fan of real-time strategy at the time, so we tried to make a real-time strategy game that was going to be called Death and Destruction. And it was supposed to be a spiritual successor to Command and Conquer shortly after they finished making all of those. And the premise of the story was the governments of the world had fleeced everybody, built a moon base, and basically said, "Hey, aliens are coming," or no, not aliens. Like, "Hey, the China's coming, so see you guys later. You guys are kind of screwed." And they took off to the moon. And so what was left is that there was a civilian group, the army group, and a group of corporations who were trying to salvage the nation after it had fallen apart. And depending on which one you picked, depend on what story you follow. And I liked the corporation route because if you pick the corporations, you got weird commercials for very odd products. So we had like the mutant control baton, which was a special control baton you could use to attack phase mutants that would run through your walls and steal your kids and stuff. And it was all done with that weird kitschy, like I guess kitschy's the term for it, like 1970s style commercials where the woman's in the gingham dress and it's like, oh, look at this fantastic new product, except she's beating like post-apocalyptic mutants with an electrified stick. So we thought it would be fun.
That sounds
Oh, and
fun.
cream of frog soup. I forgot about cream of frog soup, America's favorite soup since 1999, I think it was.
Might still come to pass, Alex. You never know. Um, if the WEF gets their way and the food supply gets constricted enough, all the farmland is assaulted. Um, After all the livestock has been butchered, we'll all be hunting frogs like true West Virginians. Uh, for those of you who don't know that is an Appalachian thing. Going gigging with a little fork, stab a frog up. Have you ever gone gigging, Alex?
I have not. Around here, they do a lot of rabbit hunting and deer hunting, but you don't have as many. We used to have a swamp around here. There's a town that sits on it now, uh, but they did a lot of work to get rid of the swampland, and the frogs around here just aren't quite big enough to be worth the time.
No, it's rare that I've seen one that is. Actually, the one that I did see was in Ohio, but eastern Ohio that borders West Virginia is very much like West Virginia. It was a big fat toad right next to a pond. Um, but no, I've never gone gigging either. Though I do know people who go squirrel hunting. Do you see any of that over where you're at?
Yeah, a lot of people do. They get the pellet guns real early, and they go out hunting squirrels and rabbits and just basically any kind of rodent they can get.
Yeah.
A
Coon
couple of them try
hunting?
possums, but those are usually too big. Yeah, coon hunt. Oh, nobody does it so much anymore, but it was certainly a thing around here for a long, long time. I was more
Yeah.
interested in camping and fire.
Fire is amazing. We have been building fires in our backyard, and my son, he's only like not even 11 months old yet, but he'll just be entranced by the gigantic flames, stare into them for endless minutes at a time. So, yeah. So, in a lot of your work, I've seen a kind of, it's that combination of tragedy and comedy, kind of indicative of the conversation so far and the stories that we've told, where everything is absolutely terrible, but there's this absurdity about things. You saw that in Battle Games. That's clearly the case in Hapless Homesteader as well. Not as much direct comedy, but there's this, lightheartedness is the way that I would describe it. And it's very uplifting, despite all of the darkness that surrounds it. Why is it that well, you can answer this question. Do you feel like you are, as an author, drawn to dystopian or at least semi-dystopian settings? And yeah, I will just leave it at that.
Well, I can answer this in two parts. The first is I like conflict, and there's nothing more conflicting than a dystopian setting, but that's not my intention to go for. Battle Games is technically not a dystopian setting. It's supposed to feel kind of like the 90s, where they're kind of at the height of a new civilization. It's post war, but it's so post war they've greatly recovered, and almost everybody alive today doesn't know what the war was like. They just read about it. Um,
Mm.
Aside from that, one of the things that greatly affected my writing style and how I see the world is actually linked to the story of my first hangover.
Tell us the
um,
story of your first hangover, please.
so at the time, I was working in a furniture warehouse, and it was really hard work, but I loved the job. It was one of the few jobs you could walk around and you could eat a ham sandwich while doing your job. Nobody would stop you because it was just that physical work. In fact, we worked down the street from a Pizza Hut that had an all-you-can-eat buffet, and you would go eat lunch till you were sick, come back in an hour, you'd be hungry again. Well, we got mad at our coworkers because I think we were in our early 20s at the time, and you understand what young man drama is. Like, okay, how can we get these guys? So me and my roommate stayed up all night. We both had $20 between us. Each of us had a $10 bill. So I bought a little Caesar's pizza, and he bought us a bottle of El Toro tequila. You know, the cheap stuff with the little plastic hat on it. And before we knew it, we had gone through the entire bottle. Now, I had almost never drank to this point, and it was a pretty big bottle back then because this is a while ago. And so it's about 3 in the morning. We have to be at work at 8, so we just head to bed. Now, I'd never had a hangover to this point, and I wake up and I feel pretty rough, like not quite ready to throw up, but I'm getting there. And so my roommate just tells me, I go take something out of the medicine cabinet. Well, never having had a hangover before, I just take what I have in the medicine cabinet, which is ibuprofen, Benadryl, maybe a little touch of NyQuil, just anything I think might take the edge off. And so we're heading to work, and I'm still feeling all this stuff kick in. So now I'm groggy and I feel sick. And we get to work, and my boss says, okay, we got a futon truck in today. We need to move the mattresses from this trailer to this trailer. And so round about the time I'm heading into the trailer, I start picking up these mattresses and I'm getting hit by waves of nausea and then relief. I'm walking around going, oh, I think I'm going to throw up. I want to die so bad. And all of a sudden it's like, oh no, I feel pretty good. I think I can make it. And all of a sudden, oh no, I'm going to die. I can't stand it. And it's fluctuating every 10 seconds. And I got to thinking about it. It's like, I've never felt so miserable as when I had those intermittent periods of relief because I was constantly reminded of what it was like to feel good right before I felt terrible again. And then I thought about that in the reverse. It's like, well, you can't truly be happy unless you have some misery. And that led me to the idea of juxtaposition. To understand how bad something can be, you have to understand what normal is. And to understand truly how bad something can be, you have to understand how great things can be. And that's you see that in almost every philosophy. You see that in like Eastern philosophies with yin and yang. You see that with the saying of a tree that's branches reaches to heaven, its roots must extend to hell. You need a little bit of misery to make somebody truly happy.
Yeah, that's absolutely the case. I actually do a lot of reading and in terms of Eastern philosophy and Taoism and the Union stuff, which is where you'll see essentially the world tree that you just described, reaching in both directions. And yeah, one actually can't exist without the other. It is the polarity that brings each into being. In the same way that if you were to obliterate the concept of ugliness, beauty would have nothing. There would be no way for anything not to be filled in the category of beautiful, and then that would eliminate the category, right? So the same thing is true.
Mm-hmm.
It's true of experience, not even in a conceptual way, but it's actually true at a metaphysical level. And if you want to, do the full Nietzschean tilt, you collapse metaphysics into physics, and that just means it's true, period. So I think that's a pretty great I'll just call it a great observation from which the settings of the stories can be born. I suppose I assumed Battle Games was more dystopian because we get the perspectives of certain characters who were in the war, so they have PTSD, and there's certain conniving in the background, and I presuppose that would have been really, 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 really big and grand, and maybe it
So
will be, maybe it's a secret.
you didn't misread that there were issues going on with those characters. This is more about me being a novice writer at the time and not understanding some of the things that could be looked into. not properly setting things up the way they were supposed to go. You did read that there is definitely something shady going on, and there is definitely some trauma there. Uh, Battle games is kind of an observation of the different types of coping with trauma I've seen in people, or not so much coping, but how people respond to what would be seen as a traumatic event. Some people develop PTSD. They never want to face it again, and they start to relapse if they're ever faced with it. Some people just grit their teeth and ride it out. Some people become consumed by it and become worse than they've ever been, and some people enjoy it. That's what some people live for. They find out that they thrive in that kind of environment, and that's what they want. And that's the undertone that goes under battle games. That's not the major stories. There's a lot of stories in battle games. It was a bigger project than I probably should have taken on in my first book series.
I thought the part you did the best at was that though. Ostensibly it is like what would you think of it? It's a combat, like you described, a sci-fi combat sports novel series. But what I thought was the strongest aspect was the interplay between the characters and them encountering their own, let's say, internal struggles. Um, Forgive me if I forget some of the characters' names, but I remember his battle game's name. Silver was his name.
Augustus Sharp.
Augustus, yeah. Like his, diving into his background. I think we might have gotten more into his background in book two, perhaps. Again, it's been a while, so forgive me if I forget anything. Um, and then Zach's character developing out, and we're getting more and more and more, and then the side characters, like I can't remember her name either, but her battle game's name was Amazon, I think, and having
Yes.
her come in, yeah, there's all of that was great. My favorite, I kind of want to ask you about my favorite character. Do you know who? I think you probably know who this is. I love Frankie. Frankie, I just wish he could have been in the first novel more. Like, you don't understand. I could read a whole book just about Frankie if you decide to do that, like, or a story or something. That would be, man, like,
So
that'd make my day.
the reason Frankie, I think, because Frankie is a lot of people's favorite character who's read the book, and Frankie is the whole point of Frankie is I wanted to take what is normally a late stage shonen protagonist and shove him in a real situation. And Frankie is that character who he doesn't understand what limits are because he's never actually had any himself. He's a genetic freak to where his history, and it's covered in the book, when he first told his parents that he wanted to play in the battle games, not simply own a team, his father wanted to discourage him. So he hired all these martial arts masters and people to train him all at the same time in hopes it would burn him out. The way parents used to have a child smoke an entire carton of cigarettes to try to wean them off the habit. Well, it didn't work on Frankie because he just loved it and he just drank every bit of it up. And so he developed that as his normal. He thought, oh, I can do this, so everybody else should also be able to do this. And that's why you see him go a little bit crazy in the second book when he's trying to train Axel. He doesn't understand that other people can be broken because even though he's been injured, even though he's been to the hospital, it's a momentary thing for him. It doesn't bother him because he knows what pain is, but he doesn't register it like you or I do. He has a philosophy similar to somebody I grew up with. If you remember when you were a kid and when your parents would discipline you, they would tell you something along the lines of, if you can't do the time, don't do the crime. Most people take that to mean it's like, okay, if I don't want to be punished, I shouldn't do these things. But people like Frankie would think of it like, oh, as long as I can deal with whatever the punishment is, I can do whatever I want to do. And because there's two ways to look at everything. And Frankie is about the best result you can have of a spoiled child. Yes, he is a spoiled child, but he's very optimistic about it. He wants the best for everyone, and he wants everyone to be able to experience things that he experiences, but they physically can't because he's a bit of a genetic freak.
Yeah, by a bit, by it means like a lot. Like, I'm very much a genetic freak. I only wish I could
Yes,
attain that to which Frankie can attain. But
Frankie is meant to be an impossible character.
which is funny, how the unrealism of him is somehow one of the most makes him one of the most sympathetic characters. At least I felt that way. Um, you know, but again, maybe that's just because I like him so much, and I immediately got rose-colored glasses whenever he showed up on the page. I think part of it, though, is that Frankie actually introduces a bit of. There are times when I feel like he introduces a bit of complexity. It's funny because he's a very simple character, right? He always acts the same way. Maybe I'm just no. Here's what I'm stuck on. I know what it is. There's a section in the second book which is comedic gold for a few. I don't know how many chapters it's in. Frankie suffers a punishment, and do you mind if I tell viewers about his punishment in the
No,
second book?
please do. This is one of my favorite things in the whole book. Go
It is
ahead.
my favorite thing in the whole book. That's why I want to bring it up. And if you read the book, even if you're like, no, I'm not interested in a sci-fi combat sport, like not esports, combat sports book, just get the second book and read it just for this section. It is worth it, I swear. So Frankie, I can't even remember what he did to deserve this punishment. I think it was to drive his training too hard for his teammates and injure them and cause all kind of problems. But he's forced, I think, read the entire dictionary. And as a consequence of this, he starts using all manner of obscure language in his dialogue, and it's dense. It's very, very dense to the point of absolute absurdity and comedy, to the point where other characters can hardly understand him. I think particularly, what is her name? It would be Augustus's. Well, I don't want to spoil anything. I think Eagle is that her? Is that her game
Yeah,
name?
Golden Eagle.
Golden Eagle. We'll just call
Yep.
it Golden Eagle. Um, I don't think she can understand him at all. I can't remember who has to. Is that right? And then who has to
She was the only one who could.
Oh,
Yeah,
could I
she
get
has
that
to
reversed?
translate for everybody else.
Yeah, it's
It
hilarious.
was
But
Harpy that couldn't.
mm, that was just hilarious every single time. When he
I
stopped
think.
doing it, I was disappointed. I just like, no, 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 forever. For all of Frankie's dialogue, could it please just be this absurd, obtuse, like the highest brow, inefficient diction possible with the highest level of specificity and the yeah, it that appealed to me like nothing else. I enjoyed that so much. So thank you for writing it. I don't know how long it took you to
Oh,
to write.
Lord, it took so long. So when I was writing battle games, my method for writing was I had to write at least 2 pages every night. And I was writing by hand. So when I said 2 pages, it had to be 2 full notebook pages front and back. It was a minimum every day. And as long as it's because I have some OCD, like it's not diagnosed, typical millennial thing, I self-diagnosed. Uh, but I set my writing to that, and I said, okay, so long as I get these done every day, I can ignore everything else about my OCD. So I worked my writing into my OCD so that I could bypass my OCD because I'm weird like that. And so when I was doing that, that took a really long time because I'm sitting there searching for every site that had synonyms and antonyms and just any kind of reference for the words I was trying to use. So I type out the sentence I'd want him to use, and then I looked for the most obscure synonyms I could find. And boy, dead internet theory is a thing because some sites like, oh, here's 67 different ones. It's like, no, no, none of these work, and none of these are actually synonyms. So I ended up having
Yeah.
to look through a couple of books for the most obscure, archaic words I can find. And I'm like, okay, I'm not even sure if these mean what I think they mean. And he only has, I think, maybe 13 or 14 lines of dialogue like this. And they're all very short sentences because each one of them took an hour or two to make because the words are
Yeah.
just that obscure.
No, I
Uh,
believe the
but as
time, man.
But as to what he did, so he is the captain of the team, which means he gets sent all the like actual paperwork by the administration. And they sent them a schedule last year of what their team was supposed to do, and they sent him an updated schedule after everybody had left, and he used it for firewood. So they were actually preparing for the wrong team for the game before. And so, as punishment, since Frankie can do anything physically, and Harpy is the one who trains everybody, she has to find creative ways to punish him. So she made him copy the entire dictionary, And I think the hardest part of that was I had to copy the sentence structure based on how far he'd gotten into the dictionary. So the first few times he did it, like I think he'd only gotten to the D's. Like, okay, what are the obscure words I can use from A, B, and C? So I had to make sure I wasn't using anything too far. It was a fun little project, but it took so much time.
It was worth it though, man. It reminds me a lot of what we talked before, and the Hapless Homesteader. I think you said to me was not an experiment, or perhaps it was also an experiment, but a almost like a writing exercise where it was written in chunks at a time. Am I recalling that correctly?
Yes, so during COVID, if you remember, there was all the conspiracy theories. And everybody's talking about, oh, by September, like the streets will be packed with just cars because all these people are going to die. And that's that's not what ended up happening. But I always like to listen to weird stuff, and I was hearing all these conspiracy theories. I'm like, if I took all of these to be true and used that as a jumping off point for a story, what would that mean? Well, naturally, it would mean everybody would die. And I got to think, well, who? There's no story in everybody dying, so what would somebody need to have survived? It's like, well, they would need to be a complete shut-in, and so that's how Bob Stacky was born. He's just a complete shut-in, and when the lockdowns came, he was happy because it didn't change his life at all, except now he could get stuff delivered that he couldn't before. And so then I made it an exercise because I was on Minds.com at the time, where I would try to release a chapter every week. And the chapters were pretty rough. If you read the book itself is a little bit rough. The prose are kind of rough. It's one of the reasons it's an epistoral story rather than a regular novel. But each week, Bob would be presented with a new problem to his survival. And each week, he had to find a way to either make progress on it or fix the problem. And my original goal was simply to do that for 25 weeks so I could finish the first book
Well,
and get it where I'm
oh,
happy
there
with
you
it. It's I try to adopt the old Blizzard philosophy back when Blizzard was a good game company that I don't want to release something until it's ready and unless it's good. And I'm not sure if the second Battle Games book will ever really be up to my standard of what I want it to be.
go. There's a quote from you that you've said before. It's sometimes, you'd rather have something that's fun rather than perfect. And I would offer that as a rejoinder to the set of no, really as a set of standards. Um, I've been reading a lot of older work recently, and something that I think we this is going to be a funny comparison. I think I've made it on the podcast before, but it's worth making again. So I'm a big fan of the like HEMA YouTubers, the historical European martial arts, and they talk a lot about swords and things like that. And they do a lot of reviews of modern reproductions of medieval weapons, things which we don't really use anymore. And one thing that does get brought up, but not very often, is that our modern reproductions are actually going to be of typically better quality than anything that existed in history. And we get this weird view in our heads. We get the mythologized view of what people used to produce. And then we are really harsh critics of what people produce now, even though it's better, often. And I think the same thing is actually, I'm dead certain the same thing is true of fiction, right? So we look at the greats, the things that we enjoyed, particularly as kids, and what we do is we say, we have the mythologized view of it in our heads. We write things now, and then we compare. We don't actually compare what we write now to what people actually wrote. Mostly we compare it to the mythologized view, and then therefore we always fall short of that standard that we all have. Not that we shouldn't have some standards, uh, but despite the roughness, I do agree with you. The first couple chapters, in particular, of Hapless Homesteader, are a little rough. Not terrible by any stretch of the imagination. Like you just read through them. But as the story evolves, the prose actually kind of gets out of its own way, and the story presents itself in exactly the way you described before, right? We said it's great when things are simple. They,
Hmm.
present themselves to the reader, and the reader can become immersed in the environment, and it very much becomes what I would describe as a strongly content-driven work, which is fine. It's great, right? That's what actually it's what most people want. Most people are not sitting there, um, analyzing the prose for its technical mastery and skill. There's a a tiny subset of people who care about that in the slightest. So, um, wouldn't beat up
You,
on your own
I've
work too
noticed
much.
that too. I've noticed a lot of people, and I'm trying not to do that with Hapless Homesteader. And what I'm unhappy about with it is that I don't think there's a lot that's really good in it. I'm really happy with. So the second book in the series is called Dam Problems, as in like a dam that dams up a river. And the premise of the second story is he gets recruited by people outside the city to help them reconstitute a dam because he's the only one that's actually built a working electric system. And they run into a guy who lives there who has pronounced himself to be Lord Garv Farkas. That is the name he actually calls himself by. And one of my favorite parts of the book is when he ends up picking fights with the local crows. And so he ends up having a little war with them where so he's one of these guys that can like take things apart. He's really technically minded. So he's taken all these drones and he equipped them all with little stunners. It's just like stun guns and things like that. So they're not really that dangerous, but he uses them against the crows. And the crows start teaming up and taking them out of the sky and dropping rocks on his house and flying into where he's living. And I think it's about a chapter or two where he's having these fights with these crows because the crows are just as obstinate as he is. So they keep trading barbs back and forth. Um, but there's other parts of the book that I'm not entirely happy with, and I'm not entirely happy with where the story is going to end. But it is one of my earlier works, and it's probably best that I do end it because a story with an end is better than a story with no end. I don't want to develop the George R. R. Martin problem.
Yeah, please don't. I'm wounded by what has become uh of that story. It's tragic. It didn't need to happen this way, right? It didn't
No.
need to. Yeah. That would be a fun, let's say, controversial turn toward the end of the interview. So there's been, I wasn't expecting to ask this question, so let's see how it comes out. There's a lot of fight on the internet, right, where people love to bash George R. R. Martin and to, I mean, there's a lot of valid criticism, like, dude, like, why aren't you finishing the series? Like, what are you doing? What are your opinions on George R. R. Martin and a Game of Thrones? Well, really, A Song of Ice and Fire. Let's leave the television series out of it, right? So, George R. R. Martin, Song of Ice and Fire. Uh, what do you think? What do they say on the internet? What's your take on that
So
whole
I'll leave
thing?
out my videos called like The Ballad of Comatose Dragons and Martin's Downfall. I'm not sure if I released that second one. If I had George R. R. Martin's ear, what I would tell him is to shut out everybody else. Like you're going to get. He's at that point of big where everybody knows about him. Everybody's got an opinion about him, and I think he's forgotten the joy of actually telling a story. And I would tell him, shut them all out, get something you enjoy, like a drink or a food, and sit down and finish the story you wanted to tell. It might not be great, it might not even be good, but it will be done. And part of the joy of a story is getting there. Now, I don't expect it's going to end up like Evangelion, where the ending of the first series was so bad that I literally didn't want to watch anime for like a month after that. It all, that first series, the ending was absolutely terrible. I hate that first series. It's so bad that I refuse to watch the second. But back to Martin, I would simply tell him, finish your story. This is your story. This is the story you wanted to tell. You might have made it a bit bigger than you intended to make. You set this grand stage, but you have the ability to finish this. Just finish it up. Whether it's a good ending or whether it's a bad ending, it will be an ending. And that is part of life. We don't always get good endings.
It's very
We
modest
don't
take. I
always
want to
get
ask a
satisfying endings, but we do
no,
inevitably get endings. Sorry, go ahead.
yeah. Oh, sorry. It just you cut off for a second. I didn't mean to interrupt you there. I want to ask about the Gynax. What was so traumatizing about the Gynax ending in Evangelion?
I so I think it was because that they built it up to where it's like, oh, we suddenly discovered that the Avas are somehow connected to people, or they're made from people, or something weird along those lines. And it started all of a sudden getting really good. And then it went into this weird pseudo psychological stuff where not everything is real. And then we get a whole bunch of really heavy symbolism and some perversion, which, I mean, it's Japan. I can just kind of discount the perversion. Yeah, if you're watching anime and it's like, oh no, fan service, you're in the wrong medium, go away. But basically, it was a major tone shift. Like we went from giant fighting robots fighting aliens that are trying to wipe out human civilization to weird pseudo psychological stuff, and then I think they had the movie that ended it where everybody died at the end, and it was just a I could kind of get what they were going for and what was happening. It just felt like a big confusing mess. Again, it ended. I can applaud them for ending it because if they'd not made that movie, I would have hated it even more. But it just wasn't a good ending.
Well, here I'll pause this too. I think the reason why is that it switched. Like the whole thing was very Freudian, and then it became very Jungian at the end. And in order to understand it, you could study Jung for forever, or you could, I don't know, like eat some mushrooms. Probably that would help. That would help. And then all of a sudden, what's because that is uh, I did not. I saw all of Evangelion when I was younger, and I also didn't like it, didn't understand the ending. And then by happenstance, I'd watched it again as I was older, and I was like, oh, okay, I get it. Nothing that is happening in this ending is meant to be literal. This is like a deep psychological resolution happening in a dreamscape. Not you can't think literally in a dreamscape. It's like you're being presented something that is like a dreamscape, which is the resolution. That's like at the end where everyone. I think it's I don't remember if that's the movie or the end of the series where everyone's congratulations, congratulations,
Oh,
right?
I hated that. I
Yeah,
hated that so much.
yeah. So again, mushrooms, and you'll hate it a little bit less. So talking
So
about hatred. Oh, go ahead, go ahead.
I was gonna say my opinion. So I have an odd opinion on mushrooms, and it's not. I've had a lot of friends that have partaken. I have not for one important reason because I hear people talk about like the DMT stuff and the clockwork elves and stuff like that. It's like yes, that might be true, but we live in the physical world right now. It's like there's nothing. You can still experience the spiritual side of things without having to pervert how your mind works. Not meaning any disrespect to people who enjoy that stuff, but the spiritual world and the physical world are connected. They always have been, and to some degree, they are reflections of each other. So you should be able to gather all the knowledge you need of the spiritual world and to still take part in it in the physical world, because I don't believe they're actually two separate places, but that they are one and the same. It's so to give an example of what I mean, and I love using this example. I used to have a very, very Christian boss, and one of the things I asked her is, "What job are you going to have when you get to heaven?" And she looked at me oddly, and she said, "But we're not going to work. We work in heaven." It's like even the Bible says the purpose of this life is to prepare for the next, which means you're probably developing skills you would use in the next life. You are developing who you are inevitably going to be. And I got to thinking, wouldn't it be ironic if heaven and hell aren't two separate places, but simply what side of the table you're on? Like, this world is heaven or hell for some people, depending upon what side of the service table are you on. Are you the one being served? Are you the one serving? It's like, what if that's the case? What if what we're doing here is trying to find the things that we're not only good at, but we enjoy doing? That way, when we do inevitably have to get our forever jobs when we die, that we have found the job that we enjoy doing and that we have developed the skills to be good at it. It's just a philosophy. I haven't found that really in any works anywhere. But I mean, if the purpose of this life is to prepare for the next, that's the only way I could see it is that this would be training for the next life.
It's interesting. I like that a lot. I wish we lived in closer parts of West Virginia. I think you'd be someone I'd really like to hang out with. Um, so No, really, really. And you might actually find that not in exactly that form, but that bit of philosophical perspective is actually present in a lot of places where I mentioned earlier. I won't go into it too much at all because this is your interview. But I mentioned that Nietzschean thing about the collapse of metaphysics into physics. That is the same idea that you said that there is no separation between a spiritual or realm of ideals. There is no separate realm of ideals that is undifferentiated from the tangible reality that we experience. Um, you know, there is no separation between that which is there. There is a thing that is ineffable, which means it's not understandable, but that doesn't mean you're not in it. It just means you don't you
Hmm.
don't you don't get it. Um, and while I haven't actually done it, people perhaps based on what I've just said would be surprised to know this. I haven't actually done any psychedelics, though I would very much like to. I just don't really have any avenues into that because I was a boring straight edge kid. Perhaps similar, not quite as similar to you, but spent too much time games, anime, and then a bunch of kung fu. Kung fu saved me. But yeah, so I think that if you take a look uh, into those philosophies and try to say like, actually, do these things agree with me? You actually might find, Alex, that they agree with you quite a bit. Um, but I wanted to ask a question about things that you might not agree with and that don't agree with you. So and again, you could pass on any of these questions as we get late into the interview because they get a little bit more spicy for the fun of the internet, right? Um, is there anything what people would, I kind of hate this word tropes, but I'm going to use it for the sake of communication.
Oh, hit me up. Let's see what you got.
Yeah. Yeah. I just want to
Yep.
know if are there any tropes, particularly whether in the trad space or the indie space or within a particular genre, that you absolutely detest and you wish would die? And if you could, you would scourge them from the earth with terrible and passionate prejudice.
Uh, at one time, there probably was. The older I get, the more I understand why certain things exist. But there are certain things I hate. But a lot of those are actually getting scourged out. Uh, and yeah, this is a common complaint of a lot of people now. I hated a lot of the woke stuff that was being thrown into books and stories and movies, not so much because of the ideals they were pushing. If you want to have a character that believes in those things, that's 100% fine. That's that character. But they'll take a character that by rights shouldn't believe in those things. Like take the Joker, for instance, where you see the regular common thing is like, I might be a murderous psychopath, but at least I'm not a bigot. It's like, okay, well, why wouldn't you be? In fact, why would you even care that somebody was? It's like you don't have morals. You're not supposed to have morals. And it was this bending, and you don't just see it in the woke stuff. I've read a lot of Christian books too. You see it in those too. Um, it's the problem of when you try to adjust a story to an ideal rather than have an ideal fit into the story. You can have any ideal fit into the story, but people aren't necessarily being honest about the ideals. But that's more of a technical thing, people actually having the ability to write and the ability to process how this would fit into their world. As far as things that I really don't like, I find myself moving further away from anime, and I saw that somebody posted something that made a lot of sense, that it's become kind of a victim of its own success, where the fights have all become ridiculously over the top or over choreographed, ridiculous amounts of destruction to the point that it's absurd. Like, oh, we've destroyed 6 buildings in this fight, and I threw somebody through 3 mountains. Like, okay, what's the repercussions of that? You've effectively destroyed an ecosystem in somebody's home. Somebody's got to rebuild that. It's like, what are you even fighting to protect at this point? Is this not a place you live? Is this not a place you care about? Do you not mind that you trashed it? And you see videos of all the time of people fighting like in their local Walmart and trashing things up, and then they wonder why the WalMarts are closing. And these are supposed to be a lot of these stories like, oh yes, I care about my community, proceeds to completely trash his community. It's like, well, what are you fighting to defend, dude? So I think one of the ways that it's become a victim of its own success is it seized on the things that a lot of people liked, like the over the top fights, the over the top powers, and they move them up to the nth degree, leaving everything else behind. But it's like I said with Frankie earlier. It's you like Frankie's a good character. He's an enjoyable character, but too much of anything is a bad thing. You know, if the entire book was just Frankie being absurd, at some point it would stop being funny. At some point it would stop being enjoyable because there's nothing to ground him. There's nothing connecting him to the world around him. And I think that's something we're missing in a lot of modern stories, especially in anime.
Yeah, no, I see that with it's what you said at the beginning, right? You need tragedy for the comedy to exist. You need everyone to be normal, relatively speaking, so Frankie can be absurd. You need, things to be realistic so that when things escalate, the escalation feels like something. If, everybody can, level cities and cities are constantly being leveled, well, what does that mean? Um, this reminds me, you might have seen it. Myself and author Michael Hine, he goes by Eternus across various social media. Michael has I think it comes from not a blog, maybe it's a blog post or an article that he wrote called "The Weeb is Always Wrong." Now, you mentioned being influenced by anime. I've also been influenced by anime. It's obviously been hugely influential in the culture. We see a lot of fiction writers feel the same way. You talked about how anime has just been a victim of its own success, specifically in terms of the bleed over into, let's say, the indie fiction space. We'll say that. So this is prose writing, right? Not comics, not animation. What do you think that uh, do you agree with the idea that the weeb is always wrong, that the influence of anime has been a net negative, or some people would argue like an entire negative on the quality of indie fiction, or do you think that there's some value there? What are your thoughts on anime's influence on fiction in the indie space?
So I think anime's influence on the indie space has been much like anime's influence on anime, or really anything popular's influence on just culture in general. You're going to get good stuff out of it. There are going to be people who take this and run with it and make something absolutely fantastic and enjoyable. Like I really enjoy the Mushoku Tensei anime and the light novels, and not because it's over the top, but because the main character is actually in a story. He actually hurts. You can understand why he does the things he does. Yeah, he's stupidly powerful, but he knows what loss is. There are places where he is completely powerless. But then you have on the opposite side of that, like Solo Leveling, which I think just finished its first season. The guy just gets in and suddenly he's more powerful than everybody, and he's cool and he's tall and all the girls want him, and he's always there when he absolutely needs to be. And you see a lot more of the solo leveling thing in a lot of modern fiction where they never lose. It's like even when they actually lose, it's kind of an inconsequential loss. We don't understand what loss is anymore because we're so used to these shows where it's a power fantasy where the guy simply can't lose. And I think that's not just exclusive to anime. I'm pretty sure that we've had that problem for a very, very long time. Uh, but anime as a whole, I think it's kind of hard to answer this. On a high level, I think it's been a positive net or a positive effect because it's allowed people to conceptualize what a high level fight would be between beings that are a low level and more of a mass consumption level. I think that particular has done a lot of damage to fiction because now every fight is that every fight someone's being pushed through a brick wall, every fight people are breaking swords on bare chests, every fight, I'm taking on a dragon. We It's not so much that this is anime's fault. I think it's that most people don't understand build up and earning something. Like something as simple as a burn. Like, say you burned your hand from your wrist to your fingertips. So in real life, that's a crippling injury. You're done. You're probably not doing anything else. You're not holding anything with that hand. The pain is probably going to make you crawl into a ball. That's 99% of people. In anime or modern fiction, the guy's just going to stand up and keep fighting on. I'm going to grit through the pain. It's like, no, dude, your hand is burned from your wrist to your fingertips. You aren't using that hand. In fact, you are probably done. And that brings us to the point that it might just be that so many people are detached from reality and what these things actually mean, because I don't think people get outside as often.
Yeah, we talked before we started recording about isekai and the influence of games in isekai and fiction. Do you think that this detachment from reality is in part due to the proliferation of experiencing the world through games, even more so than just going out and being outside and playing? Because I know very well, since I've got a couple of stepkids, and we have to be pretty strict, because if you're not pretty strict, your kid will just sit and play Minecraft all day. You have to kind of like make them go
Mm.
outside. So do you think that video games influence has something to do with that?
I think it's not so much, I mean, video games are definitely part of it. I think it's more of an overstimulation thing. We have so much at our fingertips right now, all these hyper sensory experiences, video games, movies, everything's over the top and colorful and bright and high octane and adrenaline pumping, that we've kind of forgotten what real life is actually like. It's like, yes, trying to shovel a hole that's 3 feet by 3 feet by 3 feet is going to take your entire day and wear you out. Actual physical work is hard. There's a reason we value the things that we have, like the buildings that we've built. The like if you take care of your yard and build it out and clean it up and make it look good, there's a reason you value that, because it takes hard work. I don't think it's so much that the video games are a problem. I think it's just that we've lost touch with what is actually hard and what is actually worth having.
Yeah,
And there's
certainly.
still going to be people who don't have that. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, no, no. I was just thinking, when I was there was a time where I was living with some relatives in Florida, and they had some trees they wanted to cut down in their backyard. They weren't massive trees, but they were substantial. And I was really depressed at the time, and one of the ways that I dealt with my depression was cutting down these trees. And I could have used a chainsaw, but I told them that I wanted to use an axe. And if you've ever cut
Ooh.
down trees, with particularly like hard trees, because one of the trees in particular was like, the other ones were relatively soft, but one was freaking this ancient, dense, like the first swing with the axe bounced off of the tree like entirely. Like I did no damage. And I'm not a huge guy, but I'm not like unfit. So like, you know, and I had to get practice with the other trees. So I hit it right. It was just the tree was really, really hard. It took a couple blows to break through and bite it. So yeah, I totally get when you never done that, you never had your hands where your palms are just blisters. Like there's no palm. There's just blistered flesh that you just peel all the skin off and then come back the next day with some gloves because you were an idiot the first day. Um, there's lots of things, hard things in life where if you don't experience them, then you might imbibe in this kind of indulgent. Um, it's hard to even call it a power fantasy. I would just maybe a delusion of um, invulnerability that people have. I could go on and on and on about how that actually could ruin a story, because what you've done is you've made the stakes have to be constantly escalated, whereas they should be able to be small and still significant. But I think that would be a whole conversation in and of itself. I wanted to, we might jump back into something a little more spicy or interesting, but I did want to cover things, what people should expect from you. You talked about a sequel to Hapless Homesteader, and uh, anything else?
So I'm still working on the second book in Hapless Homesteader. I've debated a third, but I think I want to end that series on a high note. Um, I have two other books in the works. I'm still working on Battle Games Book 3, which will be the last in that series. I have a book that I have been working on in my free time called The Debtor's Ball, about a bad luck charm that gets into the hands of three terrible people. One is a blackmailer, one is a human trafficker, and the other one is a conspiracy theorist accountant. And they have to figure out a way to deal with this thing that is bringing them deadly luck. And it's meant to be a dark comedy. That one is going to be a standalone, all on its own. It's going to be. I'm trying to keep it to novella length because I think it's just supposed to be a funny story about bad things happening to bad people. After that, I have another series coming out that is my attempt to repair the isekai genre. And part of it is one of the big problems I see with the isekai genre is that the main characters get in and the world is too easy for them. They're playing a game on easy mode. They're super powerful. They're super this. They're super that. And aside from which, you've got video game mechanic style magic. Just a lot of things are far too simple for them, and you have the fawning harem stuff. And I'm like, well, let's treat this like what it really is. So you're born into a different world, and you somewhat remember your old life. So you do understand what certain things are. But would that realistically make things a lot easier? And in a realistic sense, yes, but not in the sense that the game's like, oh, I'm suddenly doing adult level stuff when I'm 10 years old. No, it's things should be dirty, dangerous, and often painful. So the series that I'm writing is for this. It's going to take place over 3 different characters, and it's basically 3 different book series rolled into one. The first character is the magic user who has to learn how to deal with magic, and the magic in this world works a lot like science does in the fact that it can hurt you. Conjuring fire actually has the capability of burning you substantially and hurting you. Working with things that predict the future or look into the minds can drive you crazy as the lines between your mind and it opens you up to all sorts of terrible things out there in the world. And the third is just the silly, fun character who gets to play the almost comic relief, but he's the rogue of the group. So the whole setup of the story is that the dark being Tartarus has captured 300 souls from somewhere and has turned them loose onto this world to be reborn and to fight to be the new god of this world. And so the first character is the mage, the second character is the villain, and the third character is the rogue and slight comic relief that gets to explore the world more. And you get to see how they interact all in this world as the 300 contestants trying to become God interact.
Sounds
Though I did
interesting.
like
Oh, go ahead.
I did like the concept that they actually have to be born into the world, so they are members of one of the races that live on the planet.
Mm. Well, look, man, it's a great great setup for an isekai. It actually feels original. It doesn't, one of the things that I see a lot with isekai is that they the world feels like, okay, here's the game that I really liked. I want to imagine myself in that, and then just like playing it through. Um, Whereas this doesn't. This feels unique and original, and not like some place I've already been. I'm not thinking like, for people. It's funny. My wife compares everything fantasy to Skyrim because that's her frame of reference for the most part, and with nothing else. So everything, oh, that's like Skyrim. It's like, no, everything is not like Skyrim, but that is the case with a lot of isekai. Most of the time it's some JRPG though, I've noticed. But maybe that's because of Sword Art Online. Maybe that's the intersection of anime and game influence into isekai. I like that the consequences for magic and having magic be uncontrolled. That's definitely something I wish I would see more of. Unfortunately, what we often get is something like, and for the sake of like mimetic attraction here. That's probably the wrong way to say that, but I'll bring up Shadow Brooks because he's like the never-ending punching bag, which I feel bad for him. I actually do feel really bad. I think that I look at what happens, and I think really we're bullying an artist. That sounds funny, right? But I actually think that that's the case. I think that Chad's probably autistic, and that he says things in the wrong way, and then everyone is very eager to jump on him. I think I saw your video where you thought perhaps he was being dishonest. I actually think no. I just think he's autistic. I really think that. Anyway, to bring up
See,
to talk about Shad
I don't
and his. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
I don't think he's autistic. I think what it is he's unhappy. Like so he did something that I'm pretty sure you or I would be ecstatic if we accomplished. He got a 1 million subscriber YouTube channel talking about swords and castles. Like, can you think of a bigger male dream? People want to come and listen to you talk about weapons and castles and siege tactics and things like that. I don't know any guy that wouldn't be like, yeah, that's my dream job. I just make videos and go to these cool places. But I think that he wasn't entirely happy. I think he got to that level and he looked down and he's like, well, what now? And so he decided he wanted, like a lot of people who get to that level of success, he wanted to try to succeed in something else. Like you also see this with people like Tim Pool, where he's like, oh, I'm going to start a coffee company. I'm going to start a skateboard company. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. It's like everybody wants to be Leonardo da Vinci and try to be good at everything. And you can see this with Shad, where he had that confrontation with his brother, where he's like showing him his art. And to be frank, Shad, as an artist, like actually drawing stuff, he's not terrible. He has his own style that could be unique and interesting. But he insists on harping on AI that he can, it's a very controversial topic, and he knows it's a controversial topic. But I think he's trying to break into a field where he's not at the top, and he's trying to kind of like bully his way in because he's not happy with where he was. He got this thing that everybody wants, and he's not happy with it. I don't think it's so much that he's unhappy. I think or that he's autistic. I just think he's unhappy, and he's trying to find that happiness he thought was going to come to him.
Maybe it's hard to say what because he's got a family, he's got the dream. I think when your career is like something like YouTube, right? Um, and this is going to sound weird, and I can't go on and on about it because we're getting close to the end of the interview. But on recommendation by one of our fellow friends, I had just recently read the book Rich Dad Poor Dad, and one of the things that you do to maintain, let's say, wealth, if you want to be a rich dad and not a poor dad, is that you invest in assets. Now, what is an asset according to Rich Dad in the book? It's anything that makes money for you even when you're not working. So if you have to continuously do a lot of work to maintain it, like a YouTube channel, for instance, that's not an asset, that's a job. Now that's fine that you have a job, but the idea is if you acquire assets that liberates you from the rat race and then you can live your life focusing entirely on what you think is meaningful. And I think there's part of that where I see Shad wanting to move in to create essentially what are intellectual properties. So you could look at like Shadow the Conqueror. If you write a book, unlike a YouTube channel where if you stop producing content, even if you have a backlog, that can fade into obscurity because of the way the algorithms work. If
Yep.
you have a novel, however, it's if it gets popular, it's much more difficult for a novel that succeeds to entirely fade into nothingness. Now, you have to hit a certain threshold for that to be true, right? You have to do like J.K. Rowling level, you write Harry Potter, and it really doesn't matter. Throughout time, Harry Potter is going to be in bookshelves, or on bookshelves rather, in bookstores, um, and it'll still start be selling copies probably till the end of time because of the height to which it ascended. And I think there's part of that is a natural incentive when you actually have that much money, when you have so much money that you can, you know, you start to think, how is it that I maintain this without having to, run on the hamster wheel? Another aspect with Shad might be that he wants it's like when I was a kid. I wanted to make video games. And I got to a point where I realized like I probably could have learned to code. I might even start diving into it in later in life if I ever have time. But I was intimidated. And so I kind of backed off, but I had decent verbal ability and writing skills, so I leaned into that because it seemed to be where my talents were. And lo and behold, here I am. I think with Shad, he had a similar experience, except uh, the avenue that he turned into, like he had already found where his highest skill level was, right?
Hmm.
And so when he made that turn, he turned into a place where his skill level wasn't nearly as high. And, I don't know that that's necessarily due to unhappiness. I think that might be he really wanted, I think he even said it. What did he want to do when he was, I think he said too that he wanted to either make games or do comics. I think it might have been comics. And he didn't feel like he had the raw artistic ability, drawing style to really do that, which might be why we're seeing this with AI, because it's like with this AI augmentation, it's like with the cybernetic body, I can now live out my dream, right? It's kind of, it's kind of what it's like, right? But I do
Hmm.
think the reason why I take the autism angle is I was just reading recently. I said I wouldn't go on, but I guess I am. I was just reading recently Princess of Mars, and by Edgar Rice Burroughs, and that guy's amazing. It's a bit pulpy, but the writing is great. I wish people wrote like that now, and they don't. But there are a ton of things in A Princess of Mars. It's a John Carter novel, that Shadow of a Conqueror tried to do, and they were good ideas and they failed in execution. And the reason why I wanted to bring this up in the first place, because this actually did relate to you, was when you talked about magic systems.
Hmm.
And so I think there's an issue, and now I'll let you talk because I just dominated the conversation. I didn't mean to. When I see failure on the realms of magic systems, it seems to me to be trying to take an autistic level view on making magic into physics. And maybe it's not autism, maybe it's something else, but that seems to me to be a large problem where like everything needs to be quantifiable like it is in a game. And I find that in like or even systematized, right? We say magic
Hmm.
system. Like is it a system? Is it a comprehensible thing, or is it a dreamlike uh, quality to the universe that we don't understand quantifiably? Um, so that's a lot to talk about, but I guess that's the question. What do you think about magic systems as such? Are they systems? Are they should they be?
So
Yeah, go ahead.
taking it from the physics angle, um, so we know a lot about physics, but we are far from knowing everything about physics. And people use physics in their everyday job. They just don't realize it. Like, the carpenter uses physics every time he pounds in a nail. He doesn't think about the force he's hitting it with. He doesn't try to quantify the numbers. He simply does it. So, this is like trying to take a scientist's point of view on how magic is supposed to work. They understand the fine points and the details. And so, in the magic system that I'm building for my little isekai genre, you aren't learning about it as if it's numbers. You aren't learning about it to quantify it. You're learning about it from the point of view that an apprentice carpenter would be learning how to put together wood and put in nails. They're going through lots of practice. They're trying to get a feel for it, and they're going to hurt themselves. They're going to smash their fingers. They might injure themselves several times in the pursuit of getting this knowledge. Because if you're going to have an actual magic system, so the way I look at magic should be kind of the opposite of science, where science is quantitative, magic should be qualitative. So magic should work based on the criteria. So physics, yeah, you have to have certain criteria, but it's a numbers game. Whereas, summoning magic, you need to slaughter an ox at this time on this moon. It's performative. So it's qualitative. These things happen, so therefore this is supposed to follow, but it doesn't always. So the way my guys are working is they're getting the feel for it. To give you a little peek, to call upon, say, fire magic, which in this world is the easiest type of magic, the first thing you do is you learn to grow your soul because magic takes from the soul. Then once you've learned that, you have to reach out to something, to like a reagent, something that remembers the effect you're going for. In this case, fire. So you would use, say, the burnt wick of a candle. The burnt wick remembers the flame. It has been charred by the flame. It knows what it is. And so what you're doing is you're calling upon that memory to rekindle itself. And then you're taking that experience to apply it to other things like an unburnt candle. You have to understand, you're understanding feelings of things and the memories of things, but you're still working in the material world. The candle has known fire because it once burned. And a new candle is going to be harder to light than an old candle, and so on. So it's kind of working from the sympathetic magic angle, but magic should always be kind of weird and a little difficult to understand, but also at the same time slightly intuitive. Like, okay, that makes sense why that happened. I can kind of get the sympathy of how that worked. So it should feel both times mysterious and weird, but I think it should also feel like it's somewhat achievable. Like you or I think like, yeah, if I sat down today and worked for the next 2 years, I could probably make an awesome best-selling video game. You don't understand like all the things you would need to do it, but you know you could do it if you really put your mind to it and applied to it. But it's just like building a house or programming a computer, doing all sorts of things. It's something you could probably do, but it's mysterious and weird.
Yeah. So the literary analyst in me is looking at it and saying, okay, what we're dealing with are intuitive connotations.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, so the qualitative aspect is when it's actually, if you practice writing poetry, I also should stop here to say I encourage all of you to write poetry. To any of your, no, I'm serious actually. If you want to be a better writer, it will make you better. And the big reason why, specifically if you focus on figures of speech in your poetry writing, is that what you're doing there is you're evoking a feeling or experience in someone who's reading it, and you're evoking, say, let's say you've got an experience or feeling in mind, or that you have in your memory, and you want someone else to feel that. You could just describe it discursively, like with pure, literal denotation, but that's awful. And if you read any books that are written that way, it's atrocious. It's just, they feel bogged down, inefficient, slow. But if the writing is connotative, you are mentioning things that are different than what it is that you experienced, but that will communicate the same feeling. It will make the person, the reader, remember that feeling. And it sounds to me like your approach to writing magic in your stories or any real supernatural elements is to play upon the intuitive connotations that we have. So the idea that to bring a thing into being is easier to recall if it's a memory because there's the association there between the burnt wick and the fire that it once
Mm-hmm.
harbored, right? Um, I think that's actually really good. I don't know if you probably didn't mean that as advice, but I'm going to frame it as advice for anyone listening. If you're well, it is good. It's a good approach, right? And
Mm-hmm.
it's a good reason to buy Alex's stuff. So keep on the lookout for that, everyone. But that is probably the best way to approach magic. We're,
Well,
we're
I'm not
coming toward
even
the. Oh, go ahead.
I was
Go
gonna say,
ahead.
I'm not even looking at it from a literal standpoint. Take getting struck by lightning. If you get struck by lightning once, you're more likely than everybody else in the entire world to get struck again. I think there's one guy who's been struck about 12 times because the more often you're struck by lightning, the more likely you are to be struck by lightning. You see this in success in business and in failure in business. The hardest thing to do is succeed the first time, but the first time you succeed, you instantly become more likely to succeed the next time. The same is true for failure. One of the things that makes these things work is repeatability. Like once you've done something, it's easier to do it again. The hardest part is taking the first step, but you have to be able to repeat it. And that's a feeling. Like in a lot of things, that's more of a feeling because you notice that in your own life. This thing has happened. I'm seeing the signs of it happening again. Like all the company looks like it's about to lay a bunch of people off. All the economy looks like it's about to take a downturn. You might not understand it directly, but you've experienced these things several times, and now you're picking it up again and again and again. And that works kind of like the sympathetic law of magic that you used to see in old times. Magic was sympathetic, at least from the limited area of what I've studied. So and that's why I keep the word sympathy really does carry meaning there, like familiarity with something, being able to understand why something is carries a lot of a weight in that, and I'm kind of failing in my words to exactly express what I'm wanting to say here.
Maybe I could help. So what you're describing sounds actually like a universal principle. You talked about repeatability. So thinking evolutionarily, not merely biologically evolutionarily, but just evolution writ large is applied to all things. Anything which reproduces itself is more likely to, well, be reproduced and to sustain itself. Like anything that doesn't continue its own existence or perpetuate itself in some form or iteration annihilates. It doesn't repeat, and so it's gone over time. But everything that does. So it makes perfect, and that's a universal principle. Like things don't need to be alive for that to be the case. It just logically follows, and so because it logically follows, that principle actually applies essentially to the universe, and it would make sense that that repeatability is there in terms of the sympathetic. Well, I'm thinking of like mirroring, right? So, because a mirror produces a duplication when you experience, if there's a feeling that then gets repeated in somebody else, then that's now doubled. And in terms of culture and memetics, literally that's how they survive, in air quotes to speak
Hmm.
the figure of speech there. So yeah, absolutely, that seems to be a universal principle, and so when it's applied to magic in your writing, it just makes sense because that's how the universe really is, which is funny to say.
Hmm.
The universe is how magic is. Um, universe is magic, everyone.
And just
Yeah,
because you can explain it doesn't mean it's not magic.
correct. No, I do think that's true. Now we're running to the end. I wanted to end the interview with a question. Um, what is it that you hope to achieve when you write your fiction? Like what effect do you want it to have on your readers, or do you want it to have an effect on general society, or do you just have it? Is it just for its effect on you when you release and publish it? Yeah, what do you want to do with your fiction? Why? It's kind of a why do you write, and what do you impact do you hope to have?
All right. So, have you ever been reading a story and as you're reading it, everything else around you drops away? You even forget you're holding a book. You almost completely forget you exist. And for that moment, all that exists is the story that you're reading and what you're seeing in your mind, being lost in the world that somebody else made. That is what I hope to be able to achieve with my works. And that is what I continue to search for. But it's not as simple as having the perfect prose. It's not as simple as just finding the right words. Because the more I read and the more I search, the more I find people are able to create this with sloppy prose or with less than optimal settings. It feels like often I'm chasing something ephemeral. The ability to get lost in something seems to require several different things, and it's not always the same things. It's kind of like baking or cooking. Sometimes you don't always have every ingredient you need, but if you have the right things, or if you have different quantities but to achieve a new effect, you can still achieve the same effect. You can get somebody lost if your prose aren't that great, or if your characters themselves aren't entirely as interesting as they could be. Like, you don't have to follow every single rule, is what I'm trying to say, but I want people to be able to get lost in what I make. I want them to be able to start reading and lose track of time and then look up and see that hours have passed and they didn't even notice. That somebody can just lose themselves in what I make. That is what I want to achieve. And if I somehow come across financial success in that, which, if I do, I do. If I don't, I don't. I'd be happy if I could pay my bills and grow my food. Um, then all the better. But I'm I don't even want to say it's truly for the story. I just want to make things people enjoy. I want it to be something that people like. I think this constant drive to monetize everything, and as hippie-ish as this is going to sound, I think it's killing a lot of entertainment. A lot of the things worth enjoying are being destroyed because we're constantly trying to monetize every little thing we come across. Um, I've actually been working on a video because I think it's funny that Google had this recommendation AI tool, and it said to look into literary NFTs. And everything I looked at is like, okay, this is all tangential. None of this actually helps authors at all or readers at all. It's not. It's just an extra set of bloatware that you're trying to attach to something very simple. And I think we've got too many people trying to cash in from too many different angles because we're all trying to pursue the money so we can have a life we enjoy. But I think we're all forgetting to simply find the things we can enjoy in life. And a good story or a good book or a good video game or a good meal or just being around people you like, we forget to live in the moment. And one of the reasons I started having this thought, and as weird as it sounds, I found this video by an escort. And she was talking about a problem she was having with clientele, as many escorts do, that they're kind of disgusted by the people who come to visit them, like who engage in their services. Because, well, I mean, of general human mating practices. So she changed her thought process and she tried to be present in the moment and engage with her clientele. And she found that not only did her clients enjoy it more, but that she enjoyed it more. And I got to think, here she is in this terrible situation. That it's, I mean, and I see it as a terrible situation. She might have a different opinion of it. Uh, but you know, it's not somebody's ideal position. It's kind of gross. It's something most of us would look down upon, and she's still finding something in it that she can enjoy. She's finding a way to make the best of it, and not just make the best of it for her, but for the people who are coming to her. And she starts expressing the sympathies for these people and starts talking about why they come to see her. And it's because there's something not being met in the rest of their lives. And I think that's what we're doing with this rush to monetize everything. We're trying to monetize everything so that we can live the best life we can while actually ignoring the things around us that can make us enjoy the best lives that we already have. But it's still kind of a bit of garbled thought. It's not 100% a coherent philosophy. But
No,
it's
that was a
just
hell of an ending, man. That was great. No, I just kept imagining there's a Buddha statue in someone's. This guy owns a couple houses and then one empty lot. And there's I went my running route. I live on a. I'm actually living on the island that I grew up on. If you want to know why Sealand's an island, that's why, because I grew up on an island. Anyway, there's a Buddha statue. I just kept imagining it, and a lot of the philosophy that I've been reading, particularly recently, I've been doing blog posts on the Dakota and everything that you're saying here, where it's accept everything. Essentially, it's like accept everything just the way it is, and you know, don't wish for things to be different than they are. Be the best that you can be in what you're doing, and don't it's kind of a it's a bit of stoicism, it's a bit of optimism, and I think perhaps that's what a lot of people need right now. So thank you, Alex. Before we go, will you tell everyone where they can find your stuff?
so you guys can find me on YouTube at @TAlexRatcliffe. You can find me on Amazon where I sell my books. I do have a free book giveaway coming up on the 17th if this comes out during that time. You can pick up Battle Games and its sequel for free for one day. I believe it is the 17th. And I believe you can also find me on Twitter if you want to see me ramble and joke about funny comics I find.
All
And
right,
it's
Alex.
also at @TAlexRatcliffe.
T. Alex Radcliffe. And remember, if you want to know what that mysterious T stands for, there is a way that you can find out. Go now and pick up a copy of Hapless Homesteader. It's the only way. So thank you, Alex. This was actually a wonderful conversation. I really enjoyed it. Sorry to
I'm glad.
ramble about Shad midway through that. I didn't expect to talk that long, but
Look, conversation takes two people.
yeah. All right, man. Well, for those of you who joined us, thank you very much. And we'll see you guys next time.